I am Julian, 32 years old. After 10 brutal years of pouring my blood, sweat, youth, and sanity into building our family's tech company completely from the ground up, my own parents fired me without a second of hesitation. They did it solely to give my spoiled, incompetent younger brother the Chief Technology Officer title right before our biggest funding round. While I was sitting in the glass-walled conference room, exhausted from a 100-hour work week and trying to finalize a massive investor demo that would secure our future, my father looked me dead in the eye and said, "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. We need Preston to be the face of this company, and your presence here complicates the optics." They smiled, escorting me out of the building like a common criminal in front of the entire development team I had personally built and trained. But there was one major thing they did not know. The company laptop I so peacefully handed over contained a digital tether, a failsafe attached to my specific administrative identity. And right now, as I sit here telling you this, they are begging me on their hands and knees, leaving desperate voicemails, trying to save themselves from a multi-million-dollar lawsuit that is about to wipe them off the map. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I brought a fake empire built on favoritism and lies to its absolute knees, hit that like button if you believe in justice. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support means the world to me. Now, let's go back to the exact moment everything shattered. The air conditioning in the executive conference room was always set way too low. Felt like a meat locker, crisp and sterile. I stood there, looking across the vast, polished mahogany table at the three people who were supposed to be my flesh and blood. My father, Richard, was adjusting his expensive Italian silk tie. His posture was rigid, exuding the same fake authority he used when speaking at local HOA meetings or negotiating commercial real estate deals for the company's new office spaces. He didn't look at me as a son. I could see it in his cold, calculating eyes. He looked at me as an outdated piece of software he was finally uninstalling, a tool that had served its purpose and was now obsolete. My mother, Margaret, was sitting next to him. She was staring at her phone, entirely unbothered by the fact that she was participating in the execution of her eldest son's career. And then there was Preston, my younger brother, 27 years old, sitting with his feet practically propped up on the edge of the desk. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit and a smirk that made my hands curl into tight fists inside my pockets. Fiona, our head of human resources, was sitting in the far corner of the room. She was an older woman who had always been kind to me, but right now, she wouldn't even make eye contact. Her pen hovered nervously over a thick stack of legal documents. I could see her hands shaking slightly. She knew this was profoundly wrong, but she had a mortgage to pay. My father finally cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. He used his boardroom voice. He told me the company was undergoing a massive restructuring phase. He threw around meaningless corporate buzzwords like synergy, forward-facing leadership, and investor optics. What he really meant was that they had a massive pitch scheduled for the very next day with Victor, a titan in the venture capital world. Victor was notorious for wanting young, dynamic, media-friendly founders who looked good on the cover of magazines. My father had decided that Preston, with his perfect teeth, his country club charm, and his empty head, fit that bill perfectly. The guy who had dark circles under his eyes from writing the actual back-end architecture of our platform while they slept, did not fit the narrative. Fiona slid a severance agreement across the table. It was insultingly small. They were offering me 6 weeks of my base salary. My salary was already 30% below the industry market rate because for 10 years I had been told I was doing this for the family. I was supposed to be building equity, building a legacy. Instead, they were trying to buy my silent exit for pennies. My mother finally locked her phone and looked up at me. She gave me that soft, highly practiced look of maternal disappointment that she had perfected over the decades. She told me I should be incredibly proud of Preston. She said this was his time to shine and that, as the older brother, I needed to step aside gracefully for the ultimate good of the family legacy. She actually used the word gracefully. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the mahogany table. I didn't beg for my job, and I certainly didn't demand the equity shares they had been promising me since I was 22 years old. The anger inside me had burned so hot for so long that it had finally turned to ice. I just smiled. It was a small, cold, utterly detached smile. I reached into my messenger bag, pulled out my heavy company laptop, and set it gently on the table. I slid it across the smooth wood until it bumped right against Preston's manicured hands. "Everything is in there," I said, my voice perfectly level, betraying absolutely no emotion. "The demo environment, the back-end routing, the deployment scripts for tomorrow. It is all functioning flawlessly." Preston snatched the laptop like a greedy child grabbing a toy. "Thanks, bro, don't worry about it. I will take it from here." I looked at my father, holding his gaze until he had to look away. "I hope the investors really enjoy the presentation tomorrow." I turned to Fiona. I politely asked her if I was being escorted out of the building. She nodded, her face flushed with deep embarrassment. She stood up and led the way. As I walked through the bullpen of the development floor, not a single person spoke. The silence was deafening. Silas, one of the brilliant junior engineers I had personally mentored for 2 years, looked up from his dual monitors. His eyes were wide with absolute shock and confusion. I gave him a curt nod and kept walking. I didn't look back. When the elevator doors finally slid shut, sealing me off from the company I had built with my bare hands, I checked my watch. It was exactly 5:15 in the evening. I walked out of the opulent glass lobby, crossed the busy downtown street, and went into a small, independent coffee shop on the corner. The bell chimed as I walked in. I ordered a large black coffee, walked over to a small table by the window overlooking the office building I had just been exiled from, and placed my phone face up on the table. 10 minutes. That was the exact window of time my system needed to recognize that my administrative credentials had been permanently revoked by HR. I knew Preston better than anyone. I knew his arrogance. The very first thing he would do was log in with his brand new, shiny CTO credentials to bask in his new digital authority. He wouldn't check the dependencies. He wouldn't review the security protocols. He wouldn't look at the foundation because he had never cared about how the house was built, only how it looked from the street. 10 minutes. I sat there and watched the second hand on my watch sweep past the 12 over and over again. High above me, on the 5th floor of that sleek glass building, a silent digital alarm was tripping. A line of code I had buried deep within the core infrastructure weeks ago was slowly waking up. It wasn't malware. It wasn't a destructive virus. It was a simple, logical lock, and I was the only person on Earth who held the key. I took a slow sip of my dark coffee. The wait was finally over, but the real story, the agonizing reason I let them hang themselves with their own rope, goes back a long, long time. 10 years ago, there was no glass office building. There was no human resources department, no corporate lawyers, and there certainly wasn't a mahogany conference table. There was only my parents' dusty, uninsulated garage, smelling constantly of old engine oil stains, damp cardboard, and cheap pepperoni pizza. I was 22, fresh out of a local state college. I had a computer science degree and a head full of naive dreams about building something meaningful. My father had an idea for a logistics software platform that could streamline shipping routes for mid-sized trucking companies. He was a salesman at his core, a guy who could sell ice to a polar bear and make the bear thank him for it. But he didn't know the first thing about writing code, server architecture, or software development. He came to me with a grand pitch. He said we would be partners. He promised we would build this family empire together, side by side, and that my hard work would translate into massive equity. For the first 3 years, I practically lived in that garage. I didn't take a single dime in salary. I lived off instant ramen noodles and slowly drained my meager savings account just to pay for my own basic expenses. I built the entire database structure from scratch. I designed the user interface. I handled furious customer support tickets at 3 in the morning while my parents slept soundly in their master bedroom upstairs. I was the server administrator, the lead developer, the QA tester, and the janitor. I did it all because I believed in the family. I believed in the promise. And where was Preston during these grueling garage years? Preston was away at an outrageously expensive Ivy League school, living in a massive fraternity house, partying 4 nights a week. He was burning through a massive college fund that I had supposedly opted out of. When I was 18, my mother convinced me to attend the local state school to save the family money for the business. I sacrificed my own college experience so Preston could have his. Eventually, the company actually started to grow. My father secured our first major regional client, and suddenly the revenue started flowing. We were a real business. We moved out of the garage and into a proper, leased office space downtown. We hired a small staff, but my fundamental role did not change. I was still the invisible engine keeping the entire machine running, sweating in the server room. When the entire system crashed on Thanksgiving Day because of a server overload, it was me who left the warm turkey dinner to drive back to the office and reboot the servers. Meanwhile, my father stayed home entertaining our extended family, boasting loudly about his incredible technological vision. The real, undeniable shift in the company dynamic happened the day Preston graduated. He came back home with a degree in communications, 0 technical skills, and a massive unearned ego. My parents threw a lavish, catered party for him in their backyard. During the main toast, my father stood up, clinking his champagne glass, and proudly announced that Preston was officially joining the company as the vice president of strategy. I remember standing in the far corner of our backyard, holding a cheap can of domestic beer, watching my father hand Preston a small, wrapped box. Preston opened it to find a set of car keys. It was a brand new Porsche 911. The custom license plate read VP Prez. My father laughed, clapping him heavily on the shoulder, telling the crowd that it was a company lease to help Preston project success to our high-end clients. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a broken air conditioner and a dent in the passenger door. When I gathered the courage to ask for a modest salary raise a month later, my mother pulled me aside into the kitchen. She told me that cash flow was extremely tight, that the business was in a delicate phase, and that family shouldn't nickel and dime each other. She made me feel greedy for wanting to pay my rent without stressing. The disrespect only escalated from there. Preston knew absolutely nothing about software development, but he possessed a terrifying talent for taking credit for other people's work. During a major quarterly review with our early angel investors, I had prepared a deeply detailed presentation on a new machine learning algorithm I had spent 6 grueling months developing. It was going to revolutionize our data processing speed and cut server costs in half. 5 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin, Preston walked into my cubicle, casually unplugged my flash drive from my computer, and put it in his pocket. "Dad wants me to present this," he said, adjusting his expensive tie. "It'll look a lot better coming from the VP. For the optics." I sat in the back of the brightly lit conference room and watched my own brother read my slides, stumbling awkwardly over technical terms he clearly didn't understand. He mispronounced basic coding frameworks. But the investors, mostly older men who loved his golf course banter, ate up his energy. When they praised the brilliant algorithm, Preston just smiled his blinding smile and said, "Yeah, it took a lot of late nights, but I really wanted to push the envelope for this company." My father sat at the head of the table, beaming with overwhelming pride. I looked at him, desperately waiting for him to correct the record. I waited for him to say, "Actually, Julian is the architect behind that. He built that." He never did. He just nodded along. Then came Trent. Trent was Preston's former fraternity brother, a guy whose only real qualification was knowing how to shotgun a beer in under 4 seconds. Preston convinced my parents to hire him as a senior project manager with a salary double what I was making. Trent was an absolute nightmare for the development team. He didn't understand agile development, he completely messed up our sprint schedules, and he treated the junior developers like absolute dirt on his shoe. One terrible afternoon, I walked into the break room and caught Trent screaming at Silas over a slightly delayed feature rollout. Silas was a brilliant kid, hardworking, but incredibly timid. Trent was standing over him, veins popping in his neck, calling him a useless idiot. I intervened immediately. I stepped between them, looked Trent dead in the eye, and told him to back off and get the hell out of my department before I threw him out myself. Trent sneered at me, muttered a curse word, and walked away. 10 minutes later, I was summoned to my mother's office. Margaret wasn't just my mother. She sat on the board of directors and handled internal affairs. She closed the heavy door and gave me a look of deep, dramatic disappointment. She didn't ask what happened in the break room. She didn't care about Silas. She immediately started the guilt trip. "You are creating a hostile work environment, Julian," she said softly, weaponizing her tone. "Trent is Preston's close friend. You need to respect Preston's leadership choices. You've always been so stubborn." She paused, letting out a heavy sigh. "You're the older brother. Why can't you just support your sibling instead of constantly competing with him? Family is all we have in this world. Don't be the reason this family falls apart." It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. I felt the familiar, crushing weight of guilt pressing down on my chest. She was making me the villain for protecting my team. I left her office feeling entirely suffocated, questioning my own sanity. That following weekend, we had a mandatory family barbecue. My Aunt Beatrice was there. Beatrice was Margaret's younger sister, a woman who had recently gone through an incredibly messy, public divorce and now spent her days hovering around our family, meddling in our dynamics to make herself feel important. She cornered me by the grill while I was flipping burgers. She patted my arm, leaning in close so no one else could hear. "Your mother tells me you've been quite difficult at work lately," she whispered, her eyes darting around. "Julian, honey, you need to understand your place in all this. Preston is a star. He has the charisma. You're the backbone. A backbone doesn't need to be seen, it just needs to hold things up quietly. Just keep your head down and do your coding. You don't want to upset your father, do you? You saw what happened with my divorce. When family turns on you, you lose everything." I stared at the burning coals, the heat washing over my face. I realized right then, with absolute clarity, that I wasn't a son to these people. I wasn't even a human being with feelings and aspirations. I was a utility. I was the plumbing in their beautiful, expensive house, essential to keep the waste flowing, but expected to remain completely hidden behind the drywall. I honestly thought the worst of it was being unappreciated. I thought the absolute worst they could do was ignore my contributions and underpay me. I was so incredibly wrong. The atmosphere in the office shifted drastically as we approached the third quarter of the fiscal year. My father had somehow managed to hook a massive fish. Victor. Victor ran one of the most ruthless and successful top-tier venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. If he decided to invest, our company would scale globally overnight. The valuation would skyrocket into the hundreds of millions. The pressure inside the building was entirely suffocating. I was working over 100 hours a week, surviving on black coffee, protein bars, and sheer, stubborn willpower. The entire investor demo rested entirely on my shoulders. I was building a custom sandbox environment to show Victor exactly how our platform handled real-time, heavy-load logistics without crashing. It had to be absolutely flawless. One Tuesday night, around 11 p.m., I was completely alone in the office. The lights in the main bullpen were off. I needed a specific compliance document from HR to integrate into the demo's security protocol to prove to Victor's team that we were up to industry standards. I logged into the shared administrative drive. Fiona, our HR director, usually kept her sensitive folders locked down tightly, but she had apparently rushed out that evening and left a deeply nested subfolder completely unencrypted. I clicked on a document vaguely labeled equity_structuring final PDF. I shouldn't have opened it. It wasn't my business. But something in my gut, a deep primal instinct, told me I needed to look at it. I read the first page, then the second. My blood ran completely cold. The hum of the servers in the next room seemed to fade away. The room seemed to spin slightly. It was a highly detailed legal draft outlining the transfer of company shares. Specifically, my shares. When the company was founded in that dirty garage, my father promised me a 30% equity stake for my massive sweat equity. I had signed the initial papers years ago, but the shares were held in a complex family trust that I never fully understood. This new document was dismantling that trust. It was legally reassigning 25% of my equity directly to Preston. The justification, buried deep within pages of dense legal jargon, was a reallocation of strategic leadership assets to secure unified voting power for the upcoming Series B funding round. They were stealing my inheritance. They were systematically stripping me of the ownership I had bled for, leaving me with a measly, insulting 5% while Preston, who couldn't write a single line of basic HTML, would become the majority shareholder alongside my parents. I gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned white, my nails digging into the cheap laminate wood. My own mother, my own father, they were robbing me blind to build a throne for my brother. I was panicking, but I needed advice. I needed someone I could trust implicitly. The very next morning, before going to the office, I called Greg. Greg was our internal corporate lawyer, but more importantly, he was a longtime, trusted family friend. He used to come to my Little League baseball games when my dad was too busy working. He taught me how to tie a Windsor knot for my high school prom. If anyone could explain this horrifying document, if anyone could stop this from happening, it was Greg. I met him at a discreet, quiet diner on the outskirts of town. I slid a printed copy of the PDF across the sticky table. Greg looked at it, his face completely unreadable. He took a slow sip of his black coffee, sighed heavily, and looked at me with a look of deep pity that made my stomach churn. "Julian, I didn't want you to find out like this. Is it legal?" I demanded, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Can they just take my shares? I built this company." Greg adjusted his expensive glasses. "The way the original family trust was structured, your father retained executive discretionary power. It's a massive loophole. He argued to the board that your role is strictly technical, not strategic, and therefore the equity needs to align with the future board of directors. Victor wants a unified, aggressive leadership team. Your dad thinks Preston is that leader. The paperwork is airtight, Julian. I built the entire product, Greg." I slammed my hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "I built the wealth they are playing with. They would have nothing without my code." Greg held up his hands, playing the calm peacemaker. "I know, kid. I know it's not fair. Life isn't fair. But my advice as a lawyer? Don't fight them on this. If you drag this into a messy lawsuit, it will instantly kill the VC deal with Victor. Your family will ruin you in court. They have the company war chest to pay for endless litigation. You have a standard salary. Let it go. Just secure your 5%, sign the new agreement, and keep working. 5% of $100 million is still a lot of money." I left the diner feeling like a hollow shell. Greg was right about one terrifying thing. I couldn't fight them in a traditional courtroom. They had the resources to bury me in legal fees until I went bankrupt. But that evening, as I was driving home in the rain, I took a detour through downtown. As I drove past a high-end, ridiculously expensive steakhouse, I saw a familiar car parked out front. It was Greg's silver Mercedes. Parked right next to it, gleaming under the streetlights, was Preston's Porsche. I parked my beat-up Civic across the street. I pulled my hood up, walked up to the restaurant window, stood in the dark shadows of an awning, and looked inside. There they were. My father, my mother, Preston, and Greg. They were sitting at a VIP booth, laughing loudly, clinking expensive glasses of red wine, and cutting into thick, rare steaks. Greg was smiling broadly, raising his glass in a toast directly to Preston. The betrayal hit me like a physical punch to the gut. The air left my lungs. Greg wasn't a neutral advisor trying to protect me. He was the architect of my destruction. He was the one who scoured the trust documents to find the loophole for them. He sold me out, betraying decades of trust, just to secure himself a permanent seat at their wealthy table. I walked back to my car. I didn't cry. The deep sadness I had felt all day was completely gone, burned away by a cold, calculating, terrifying rage. I realized then that blood meant absolutely nothing to these people. Loyalty was a joke they told to keep the peasants working. Money, status, and control were their only gods. I drove straight back to the office. It was 2 a.m. The building was dead silent, illuminated only by the emergency exit signs. I sat down at my desk, booted up my machine, and opened the root directory of the entire platform. I wasn't going to delete anything. I wasn't going to sabotage the company's data. That would be highly illegal, and I wasn't going to give them a valid excuse to throw me in a jail cell. Instead, I opened a hidden, encrypted file I had started months ago. I began to write a new script. It was a masterpiece of back-end architecture, weaving through every single vital component of the software. I called it a digital tether. I intricately linked the entire sandbox environment, the core customer databases, and the proprietary routing algorithms to one specific undeniable thing: my active administrative credentials. If my account remained active, the system ran flawlessly, seamlessly. If my account was suspended, revoked, or deleted by HR, the script would initiate a catastrophic lockdown. It wouldn't destroy a single byte of data. It would simply encrypt the pathways and sever the connections. It would turn the entire multi-million-dollar platform into a read-only brick. No one could edit, no one could present, no one could access the back end to fix it. Around 4 a.m., the heavy office door clicked open. It was Silas. He had come in early to run some stress tests on the servers before the morning rush. He walked past my desk, stopping dead in his tracks when he saw my bloodshot eyes and the frantic, aggressive speed of my typing. "Julian, have you been here all night?" he asked, looking genuinely concerned for my health. I hit the deploy key, saving the tether deep within the system architecture where Preston and Trent would never, ever find it. I closed the terminal screen and looked up at Silas. This kid was a good engineer. He had a good heart. He didn't deserve to go down with this sinking ship. "Silas," I said quietly, my voice raspy from lack of sleep. "Yeah, update your resume today. Make sure your portfolio is solid. And whatever you do, don't come into the office on Thursday." He stared at me, wildly confused, but he saw the dead seriousness in my eyes. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded slowly and walked to his desk. I packed up my messenger bag. The trap was meticulously set. Now all I had to do was wait for my loving family to pull the trigger. 3 days before the highly anticipated presentation with Victor, the entire office was vibrating with a toxic, nervous energy. The VC deal was the only thing anyone could talk about. If it went through, the executives would be rich beyond imagination. If it failed, heads would roll. My father called me into his spacious corner office. He was pacing back and forth furiously across the plush carpet, holding a printed copy of the agenda for the demo day. "Julian, sit down and listen to me," he commanded. He didn't even look up from the paper. "Victor is bringing his senior technical team to evaluate the back end, but Victor himself isn't a tech guy. He's a numbers guy. He's a vision guy. He likes a good, compelling narrative." "The system speaks entirely for itself," I replied flatly, staring at the wall behind him. My father stopped pacing and finally looked at me, irritation flashing in his eyes. "That's exactly what I want to talk about. During the software walkthrough on Thursday, you are to remain completely silent." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised by the audacity. I built the system, every single line of code. If his tech team asks specific questions about the load balancing limits or the encryption standards we use for client data, Preston won't know the answers. He doesn't know the difference between Java and JavaScript. Preston has been rehearsing the talking points all week with Trent. My father snapped, deeply annoyed that I was pushing back against his perfect plan. "He knows enough to get by. We need to present a unified, polished, highly confident front. You getting deep into the nerdy, technical details is going to bore Victor and derail the momentum of the pitch. If a highly technical question comes up, Preston will handle it at a high level and promise to circle back. You are there to click the buttons and run the simulation. Do you understand? You want me to be a silent prop. I want you to be a team player for once." He raised his voice, slamming his hand on his desk. "For once in your life, put your massive ego aside and let your brother shine. His face is better for the company's media profile, Julian. The investors want a Steve Jobs, not a guy who hides in the server room. I stared at him. The disrespect was so casual, so deeply ingrained in his worldview, that he didn't even realize how monstrous he sounded. He was asking me to play the mute servant while my brother stole my life's work. Understood, I said quietly, standing up. I won't say a single word. I left his office. Just as I walked out into the main hallway, a loud commotion started near the front reception area. Several employees had abandoned their desks and were looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows down at the busy street below. I walked over to see what was happening. Down on the street, a massive flatbed truck was offloading a car. It wasn't just any car. It was a brand-new, cherry-red Ferrari. Preston was standing on the sidewalk, laughing loudly, high-fiving Trent. He signed a clipboard handed to him by the delivery driver and tossed the keys in the air, catching them with a smug grin. My mother walked up beside me, holding a delicate cup of herbal tea. She was beaming with overwhelming pride as she looked down at the street. "Isn't it absolutely beautiful?" she said, not even turning her head to look at me. "Your father and I decided to give him his performance bonus a little early. He's been under so much immense stress preparing for Victor's arrival. He needed a win to boost his confidence. The Ferrari, bought with company funds, drained directly from the equity they were actively stealing from me, given as a reward for a presentation he was going to fake using my grueling labor. I didn't say a word. I didn't show an ounce of anger. I just turned around and walked back to my desk, the silence in my heart absolute. That Sunday, the night before the chaotic week of the demo began, was our mandatory family dinner. It was a tradition my mother insisted upon to maintain the fragile illusion of a happy, cohesive family unit. I arrived at their sprawling suburban mansion right on time. The wide, circular driveway looked like a luxury car dealership, with Preston's Porsche and the new Ferrari parked side by side, gleaming under the security lights. Dinner was agonizing. The entire conversation revolved around Preston and the impending $50 million deal. Aunt Beatrice was there again, practically drooling over Preston's new car, asking him how fast it went. My father was pouring expensive, aged scotch, already celebrating the victory he assumed was guaranteed. I sat at the far end of the long dining table, pushing my food around my plate, listening to them talk about the future. A future they had meticulously engineered to exclude me. When dinner was finally over, my mother stood up, wiping her mouth with a linen napkin. "Julian, be a dear and clear the table. Load the dishwasher for me, would you?" Preston laughed, taking a long sip of his scotch. "Yeah, Julian, make sure you scrub the pots really good. We need a clean kitchen for a fresh start tomorrow." I stood up without a word, gathered the heavy plates, and walked into the kitchen. I stood at the deep sink, running the warm water over the fine china. Through the open pass-through window, I could see them in the living room. My family. They were laughing. My father was smoking a cigar. They were so incredibly confident in their theft. They thought they had won. I dried my hands on a towel. I reached into the inside breast pocket of my jacket hanging on the chair next to me. My fingers traced the crisp, sharp edge of a thick envelope. Inside that envelope was a certified, legally binding document from the state. It was an LLC registration, a company entirely in my name, and attached to it was a federally approved copyright and patent registration for the core algorithm that powered our family's entire logistics platform. For the past 2 years, knowing deep down they were severely underpaying me and taking advantage of my loyalty, I had rebuilt the most advanced, vital parts of the system on my own time. I wrote the code on my own personal equipment at home, never on company servers. Legally, the intellectual property belonged entirely to me. I had simply been granting my father's company a free, informal, undocumented license to use it because I naively thought we were building something together. But the moment I read that PDF, the moment they drafted the paperwork to steal my equity, I finalized the LLC and legally secured my intellectual property. I looked through the kitchen window at my father, who was patting Preston on the back. They thought they had outsmarted the quiet, nerdy older brother. They thought I was just going to roll over and take the beating because I always had. They thought my silence was weakness. I smiled. The calm before a massive storm is a very real, physical sensation. It feels like the air pressure drops in the room, making it hard to breathe. I finished loading the dishwasher, wiped down the granite counters meticulously, and walked back into the living room. "Thanks for dinner," I said calmly, putting on my jacket. "I need to go prep for tomorrow." "Don't stay up too late, Julian," my mother called out, not even looking away from the television screen. "You need to look presentable for Preston's big day tomorrow." "I will be exactly where I need to be," I promised. The next morning was Monday, the day before the demo. That was when they called me into the glass conference room. That was when my father fired me to secure Preston's optics. That was when I handed over the laptop without a fight. That was when Fiona escorted me out, and I walked to the coffee shop across the street to wait. And now, as I sat in that quiet coffee shop, staring at the steam rising from my cup, my watch clicked exactly 10 minutes past the hour. I picked up my phone. The screen immediately lit up, buzzing violently against the wooden table. Missed call, Preston. Missed call, Preston. Missed call, Richard. Text message. "Richard, where the hell are you? The system just locked us out. Get back here right now." I took a slow, deep breath, tasting the bitter black coffee. The storm hadn't just arrived. I was the storm, and they were standing completely unprotected right in the middle of it. The screen of my smartphone illuminated the dark, polished wooden surface of the small coffee shop table. It was buzzing so violently and consistently that it was actually vibrating its way toward the edge, threatening to fall and shatter on the tiled floor. I just sat there, my hands wrapped firmly around the warm ceramic mug of black coffee, watching the endless cascade of notifications slide down the glass screen. It was a digital waterfall of pure, unadulterated panic. There were 42 missed calls in the span of exactly 12 minutes. 30 of those desperate calls were from my father, Richard. 10 of them were from Preston, my golden child brother who was supposed to be the new brilliant face of the company. And 2 calls were from Greg, the slippery corporate lawyer who had orchestrated my financial execution just a few days prior. Then came the text messages. My father's texts shifted rapidly in tone, painting a vivid picture of a man entirely losing his grip on reality. The first text was arrogant and demanding. "Julian, the sandbox environment is locked. You forgot to disable your 2-factor authentication. Give Preston the admin password immediately." 2 minutes later, the tone grew more aggressive. "This is not funny, Julian. You are in direct violation of company policy. Get back to the office right this second and fix this mess." 5 minutes after that, the absolute panic set in. Victor's technical auditors just bumped up their timeline. "They are in the lobby. They are coming upstairs in 2 hours to review the back-end infrastructure before tomorrow's massive demo. If you do not unlock this server right now, I will call the police. I will have you arrested for industrial sabotage." I took a slow, highly deliberate sip of my bitter black coffee. The heat warmed my chest, but my heart was beating with a slow, icy rhythm. I did not reply. I did not type a single letter. I did not send a sarcastic emoji. I just sat in the quiet corner of that coffee shop and watched the frantic digital footprint of a dying, fraudulent empire playing out on my lock screen. Then, a text message from Silas popped up. Silas was the brilliant, hardworking junior engineer I had specifically warned to update his resume the night before. I had a soft spot for Silas. He reminded me of myself 10 years ago, before my own family drained the life out of me. "Hey man," Silas wrote, "I do not know what you did, but it is absolute chaos over here on the 5th floor. Preston is literally crying in the server room because he typed the wrong password 3 times and triggered a secondary, hard-coded firewall lock. Trent is hiding in the executive bathroom. Your dad is screaming so loud his face is purple, and he just threw a heavy stapler at the wall. Are you okay? Where are you?" I smiled. It was a genuine, weightless, profoundly liberating smile. It was the first real smile I had worn in a decade. I typed back a quick, reassuring reply to the kid. I am perfectly fine, Silas. Remember exactly what I told you last night. Keep your head down, pack your personal belongings, and stay entirely out of the crossfire. I knew exactly what was happening up there in that glass-walled office. Victor, the billionaire venture capitalist, was not a man who waited around or accepted excuses. His technical auditors were notoriously ruthless. They demanded early, unfettered access to the staging environment to verify the code integrity and the load balancing capabilities before Victor would even consider stepping foot in the boardroom the next morning. My father, running entirely on arrogance and ignorance, had confidently promised them full, transparent access. He fully believed that Preston could just click a shiny button, run the simulation, and present my 10 years of grueling life's work as his own brilliant creation. But without my active administrative credentials, the digital tether I had written completely encrypted the routing pathways. The data was not deleted. The servers were not destroyed. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be, but it was sealed tightly behind a massive cryptographic wall that Preston's expensive, useless communications degree could not even begin to comprehend. The system was demanding a master key that no longer existed within their corporate network. Through the large, rain-streaked window of the coffee shop, I saw the heavy glass doors of my family's office building swing open forcefully. Fiona, our head of human resources, hurried out onto the wet pavement. She looked absolutely frantic. She was looking left and right, clutching her beige trench coat tightly against the biting city wind. She was scanning the street, and then her eyes locked onto the coffee shop window. She spotted me sitting in the corner booth. Fiona practically ran across the crosswalk, dodging angry downtown traffic and blaring taxi horns. She burst through the door of the coffee shop, completely out of breath, her hair plastered to her forehead by the freezing drizzle. She marched straight up to my table and pulled up a chair entirely uninvited. She collapsed into it, gasping for air. "Julian," she gasped, her hands shaking as she placed them on the table. "Julian, you have to come back upstairs. Right now. I am begging you." I did not break eye contact. I kept my voice incredibly soft and steady. "I do not work there anymore, Fiona. I was terminated effective immediately. Do you remember? You are the one who printed the paperwork. You are the one who slid the severance agreement across the mahogany table. You are the one who escorted me out." Fiona looked absolutely terrified. The professional HR mask had completely melted away, leaving a desperate woman who realized she was on a sinking ship. "Your father is completely losing his mind," she pleaded, leaning in closer. "He told me to come down here and find you. He saw you cross the street when you left. Julian, Victor's senior technical team is sitting in the lobby right now. They are asking for the system architecture keys and the root access passwords. Preston does not know where they are. He does not even know what a root directory is. Julian, please listen to me. Your dad is threatening a massive lawsuit. He is on the phone with Greg right now. He said he is going to sue you for millions for industrial sabotage and have the police drag you out of this coffee shop in handcuffs." I leaned back against the comfortable leather booth. The threat of a massive lawsuit was exactly what I had anticipated. It was the only weapon my father knew how to wield. He used lawsuits to solve every problem, from petty real estate disputes to bullying small vendors. "Fiona, look at me," I said calmly. "Do I look like a man who is afraid of a lawsuit?" She stared at me, really looking at me for the first time in years. She did not see the subservient, quiet, exhausted workhorse who used to fix her printer and buy the office snacks. She saw a man who was entirely at peace. She saw someone who held every single card in the deck. "Just come upstairs," she pleaded quietly, her voice breaking. "Just talk to them. Try to negotiate. Before this completely destroys the entire company. People are going to lose their jobs today, Julian." The company destroyed itself the moment it prioritized a luxury car over its foundation, I replied. But I finished the last cold drop of my coffee and stood up. The waiting game was over. It was time for the main event. "All right, Fiona," I said, grabbing my wet jacket. "Let's go upstairs. Let's go have a chat with the executives. We walked back across the busy street in complete silence. We entered the opulent lobby, passed the security desk, and stepped into the elevator. When the polished steel doors finally opened on the 5th floor, the tension in the air was so thick you could choke on it. It felt exactly like walking into a military submarine that was rapidly taking on water. The junior developers were standing around their cramped cubicles, whispering nervously to each other, their eyes darting around. The normal hum of corporate productivity was completely dead. I walked straight past the bullpen, ignoring the wide-eyed stares of my former colleagues, and headed directly down the carpeted hallway toward the main executive boardroom. Fiona trailed behind me, her heels clicking nervously. I did not knock. I placed both hands on the heavy oak doors and pushed them wide open. The scene inside the boardroom was a stunning masterpiece of corporate desperation and utter incompetence. My father was sweating so profusely that large wet patches had formed under the arms of his custom-tailored shirt. His expensive silk tie was loosened and hanging crookedly. He was yelling incoherently into his cell phone. Preston, the golden child, the brand-new chief technology officer, was pacing the entire length of the massive mahogany table. He was violently biting his fingernails, his perfectly styled hair now a chaotic mess. He looked exactly like a terrified child who had just broken an incredibly expensive vase and was waiting for the punishment. My mother, Margaret, was sitting rigidly in the far corner, her face completely drained of color. She was frantically texting someone, likely Aunt Beatrice or Greg, trying to find a magical solution to a problem she could not comprehend. And standing near the large, blank presentation screen at the front of the room were 3 men in very sharp, dark, conservative suits. These were Victor's technical auditors. They stood with perfect posture, holding thick leather portfolios. They looked deeply unimpressed, annoyed, and impatient. The moment the heavy doors hit the wall, my father's head snapped up. Well, my father barked, slamming his phone down on the table so hard I thought the screen would shatter. He marched toward me, his face a mask of furious rage. Look who finally decided to stop acting like a petulant child and be an adult. He immediately turned to the 3 auditors, plastering on a fake, greasy salesman smile that made my stomach turn. Gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. This is Julian. He was our former back-end technician. We had a very slight, insignificant internal security protocol trip when we updated Preston's new CTO administrative access this morning. But Julian is here to quickly clear the cache and reset the firewall. We will have the sandbox up and running for your review in less than 2 minutes. The lead auditor, a tall man with graying hair and piercing blue eyes, raised a skeptical eyebrow. He looked at my casual jeans and damp jacket, then looked back at my sweating, panicked father. We have been waiting in your lobby for 45 minutes, Richard, the lead auditor said, his voice cold and flat. Victor does not invest $50 million into companies with unstable infrastructure or sloppy internal communication. We need to see the sandbox load times, the server stress test results, and the encryption protocols right now, or we are leaving this building and closing the book on this deal. It will just take 1 single second. I promise, Preston chimed in, his voice cracking embarrassingly high. He looked at me, his eyes wide with desperate, pathetic pleading. The arrogant smirk from earlier that afternoon was completely gone. Right, bro? Just type the override command into the terminal. Just fix it. My father marched over to me, stepping uncomfortably close. He reached out and grabbed my upper arm tightly, his fingers digging painfully into my bicep, trying to physically pull me toward the open laptop sitting on the presentation podium. Unlock it! He hissed viciously directly into my ear, dropping the fake smile entirely. His breath smelled like stale coffee and sheer panic. Unlock it right this second, Julian, or I swear to God I will strip you of your last 5% of equity. I will call Greg, and I will bury you in a lawsuit so deep you will be paying my legal fees until you are 80 years old. You will never work in the tech industry again. I did not struggle. I calmly reached down with my opposite hand and peeled his sweaty fingers off my arm, bending his wrist back just enough to make him wince and step away. I smoothed my jacket, turned my back on my father, and walked slowly to the exact center of the room. I did not look at the laptop. I did not look at Preston. I looked directly into the eyes of the lead auditor. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly and calmly across the dead silent room, "I sincerely apologize for wasting your highly valuable time today, but I must inform you that there will be no technical demonstration. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." "What the hell are you doing?" my mother shrieked, finally standing up from her corner chair, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered into pieces. "Julian, stop throwing a temper tantrum. You are embarrassing the family in front of our guests. Do what your father says." "I am not throwing a tantrum, Margaret," I replied, deliberately using her first name. It felt incredibly liberating to drop the title of mother for a woman who had never acted like one. "I am simply clarifying the stark reality of the situation for our esteemed guests." I turned back to my father. He was practically vibrating with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. "You want to aggressively threaten me with a massive lawsuit, Richard?" I asked, reaching slowly into the deep inside pocket of my jacket. "You want to talk about company property, fiduciary duties, and equity shares? Let's have a very open conversation about it right now." I pulled a thick, heavy, sealed manila envelope from my jacket. I held it up for a brief second, making sure everyone in the room saw it, and then I tossed it onto the center of the mahogany table. It landed with a loud, heavy, incredibly satisfying thud that echoed in the quiet room. The trap was fully sprung, and there was absolutely no way out. The executive boardroom fell into a deathly, suffocating silence. The only sound remaining in the entire space was the faint, rhythmic hum of the air conditioning unit pushing cold air through the vents above us. The three auditors exchanged highly confused, suspicious glances. Preston backed away from the table, staring at the thick manila envelope like it was alive, ticking explosive device that was about to level the building. "What is this nonsense?" my father demanded, his voice shaking slightly. He refused to touch the envelope, hovering his hands over it as if it might burn him. "I do not have the time or the patience for your childish, vindictive games, Julian. The joke is over. Unlock the server immediately." "Open it," I said, pointing firmly at the package. "Since you and your lawyer are so incredibly fond of drafting secret legal documents to steal a college fund and strip away inheritances, you should really take the time to read this one." My father hesitated. He looked at my mother, who nodded frantically, urging him to figure out what was happening. He snatched the envelope off the table and tore it open aggressively, ripping the paper. He pulled out a thick stack of crisp, watermarked legal papers. As his frantic eyes scanned the bold text on the very first page, all the color completely drained from his face. His jaw went completely slack. His hands began to tremble so violently that the papers rustled audibly in the quiet room. "What does it say, Richard?" my mother asked, her voice trembling with rising panic as she practically ran over to look over his shoulder. "It says," I announced loudly, making absolutely sure the venture capital auditors heard every single syllable, "that this family company does not own the routing algorithm. It does not own the machine learning database. It does not own the proprietary back-end architecture. And it certainly does not own the sandbox logistics environment you were planning to showcase tomorrow to secure Victor's $50 million. "That is a complete lie," Preston shouted, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. "We paid for it. You built it here. It was built on company time. It belongs to us. Actually, Preston, it wasn't." I corrected him smoothly, enjoying the absolute panic in his eyes. "For the last 2 grueling years, while you were out leasing luxury sports cars with company funds, taking 3-hour lunches, and playing golf with your fraternity brothers, I was taking a base salary that was 30% below the industry poverty line for a senior engineer. I was routinely denied overtime pay despite working 100-hour weeks. So, knowing my immense value, I built the entire next-generation architecture completely on my own time. I built it on my own personal equipment at my own apartment on the weekends. I am the sole, undisputed author of the code. I took a slow step forward, addressing the room like a professor delivering a lecture. And under state and federal intellectual property law, the software belongs entirely to the creator unless there is a specific, signed, work-for-hire contract in place. I looked directly at my father, who was physically shaking, unable to tear his eyes away from the legal seals on the documents. And as you and Greg, the lawyer, so brilliantly, so meticulously pointed out when you secretly drafted the documents to steal my inheritance and my equity, my role here was strictly technical, non-strategic. You explicitly categorized me as an at-will employee, not an owner, not an executive. You specifically refused to give me an employment contract or a non-compete clause because you did not want to pay for the legal benefits. You shot yourself in the foot to save a few dollars. My father looked up slowly, his eyes wide with a horrifying mixture of absolute terror and devastating realization. That thick document you are holding in your trembling hands is a federally approved copyright and patent registration. I continued, pacing slowly around the mahogany table. The core algorithm is officially registered under a private limited liability company, my LLC. For the past 2 entire years, I have been generously granting this corrupt company a free, informal, undocumented license to utilize my proprietary software just to keep the lights on. I stopped right in front of Preston, who looked like he was about to physically be sick on the expensive carpet. But at 5 o'clock today, this company officially terminated my employment. You maliciously revoked my administrative access to hand it to a man who does not know the difference between Java and JavaScript. By firing me, you effectively, legally severed the licensing agreement. The digital tether I installed in the code was not an act of sabotage. It was a perfectly legal, automated security measure designed specifically to protect my private intellectual property from unauthorized corporate theft. The very moment you fired me, the system locked you out to prevent intellectual piracy. The lead auditor let out a long, low whistle. The tension in his posture completely vanished, replaced by the fascinated amusement of a man watching a train wreck in slow motion. He stepped forward, reaching out his hand toward my paralyzed father. "May I please see that document, Richard?" The auditor asked politely, though it was not really a request. My father was completely paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare of his own making. The auditor gently but firmly pulled the stack of papers from his rigid hands. The auditor flipped through the pages rapidly, his trained eyes scanning the patent registration, the official state LLC filing, the federal copyright seals, and the timestamps that proved my ownership predated the current funding round by 2 years. A slow, highly amused, entirely cynical smile spread across the lead auditor's face. He closed the portfolio and looked at my father with absolute disgust. "Richard," the auditor said, his voice dripping with professional disdain and icy judgment, "Victor sent my team here today to evaluate a cutting-edge, proprietary logistics platform. It appears you do not actually own a logistics platform. You own an empty, worthless shell company, a few leased computers, and an expensive office space you can no longer afford." No, wait. Please listen to me," my father stammered, stepping aggressively toward the auditor, his hands raised in a posture of desperate surrender. "We can fix this right now. It is just a minor family dispute. A simple misunderstanding. Julian is my son. We can draft a purchasing agreement for the LLC right this second. We will buy the patent." "A purchasing agreement using what funds?" the auditor countered sharply, taking a step back. "You are actively trying to secure Series B funding based entirely on assets you literally just fired and do not own. This is borderline corporate fraud, Richard. Victor does not do business with frauds. And he certainly does not do business with incompetent executives who do not even know who holds the legal rights to their core product." The auditor turned to his 2 team members, snapping his fingers. "Pack up the briefcases. We are completely done here. I will call Victor from the car on the way back to the airport and tell him to pull the term sheet immediately." "Please, you have to give me a chance," Preston begged, throwing away all his manufactured dignity and literally grabbing the sleeve of the lead auditor's expensive suit jacket. My face is on all the investor brochures. I am the chief technology officer. I can learn the code. I can run the team. Just give me a week. The auditor stopped. He looked down at Preston's manicured hand, desperately clutching his sleeve. Then, he looked Preston dead in the eye with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Son," the auditor said softly, "you couldn't code a toaster." He violently brushed Preston's hand off his jacket, smoothed his lapel, nodded respectfully in my direction, and walked purposefully out of the boardroom, his team following tightly right behind him. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, echoing loudly, sealing my family inside the dark, suffocating tomb they had spent 10 years digging for themselves. The $50 million deal was completely dead, evaporated into thin air. Their entire future, their social status, their wealth was gone in the span of 10 minutes. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Now, let me tell you about the absolute glorious meltdown that happened the second those auditors left the room, and how I finally walked away forever. The silence that immediately followed the auditor's dramatic departure was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the sound of a massive, multi-million-dollar illusion violently crashing into cold, hard reality. My father staggered backward, his legs completely giving out beneath him, and collapsed heavily into one of the plush leather boardroom chairs. He stared blankly at the mahogany table, burying his face in his trembling hands, letting out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. My mother, Margaret, immediately snapped into her deeply ingrained survival mode. The venomous, calculating corporate shark vanished in an instant, replaced seamlessly by the weeping, desperate, emotionally manipulative matriarch. She rushed across the room toward me, grabbing my hands with her cold, clammy fingers, squeezing them tightly. "Julian, please, oh my God, please," she cried, real panic tears finally streaming down her heavily made-up face, ruining her mascara. "You have proved your point. You are brilliant, we know that now. We were wrong. We were so incredibly, horribly wrong to treat you that way. Please, honey, you are our son. You have to unlock the system. We can call Victor back right now. We will explain it was a technical glitch. We will give you the CTO title. Preston doesn't need it. We will give you 50% equity, no 60%. Just sign the patent over to the family trust so we don't lose the business." I looked down at her hands, desperately clutching mine. I searched deep within myself for a shred of empathy, a tiny spark of familial love. But there was nothing. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, no lingering guilt. 10 long years of her relentless emotional manipulation, her guilt trips, and her blatant favoritism had completely burned out my capacity to care about her tears. "There is no family, Margaret," I said softly, my voice devoid of any emotion as I firmly pulled my hands away from her desperate grasp. "Family doesn't secretly draft legal documents behind closed doors to steal an inheritance. They do not steal a decade of brutal sweat equity just to buy a shiny red Ferrari for the golden child while the older brother eats ramen noodles. You made your bed. Now you get to sleep in it." Preston, who was leaning heavily against the far wall, suddenly lashed out. The golden child's fragile ego had completely shattered. "This is all your fault," he screamed, his face red and blotchy, spit flying from his lips. "You did this on purpose. You are a psychopath. You set me up to fail in front of Victor. How am I supposed to pay for the Porsche now, Julian? I have expensive real estate leases. I have a massive lifestyle to maintain. You ruined my life." I looked at my younger brother, feeling nothing but profound second-hand embarrassment for him. "You are 27 years old, Preston. It is time to grow up and get a real job. Maybe Trent can help you find work at a frat bar. Speaking of Trent, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the heavy boardroom doors. It was Trent, the arrogant frat brother project manager who loved screaming at junior developers. He was slowly, quietly, pathetically inching his way out of the room, realizing that the gravy train had just spectacularly derailed and the company was dead. I let him go. He was a rat fleeing a sinking ship, not worth a single breath of my time. Suddenly, the boardroom doors swung open violently, nearly hitting Trent on his way out. It was Greg, the treacherous corporate lawyer and fake family friend. He must have rushed over from his downtown law firm the moment my father called him in a blind panic earlier. He walked in holding a sleek, expensive leather briefcase, puffing his chest out, looking highly aggressive and ready for a legal fight. "Julian," Greg barked, stepping forcefully into the room and immediately pointing a threatening, accusatory finger directly at my chest. "I don't know what kind of stunt you think you are pulling, but what you have done here today is a direct, egregious violation of your corporate fiduciary duty. I am drafting a massive, multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit as we speak. We are going to sue you for tortious interference, breach of implied contract, and grand intellectual theft. I will personally see to it that your little LLC is bankrupted by Friday afternoon, and you will be begging for a job at a fast food restaurant." My father looked up from his hands, a tiny, pathetic glimmer of malicious hope returning to his red eyes. He always relied heavily on Greg to aggressively bully smaller companies and vulnerable people into submission. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I slowly reached into my pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and tapped the screen to open my audio files. "That is a very aggressive, very expensive legal strategy, Greg," I said, a dangerous calm settling over me. "But before you go to the courthouse and file that massive lawsuit, you might want to listen to a highly interesting conversation I recorded on my car's dashcam 3 nights ago, parked right outside of a very expensive downtown steakhouse." I turned the volume all the way up and hit play. The audio filled the silent boardroom. It was incredibly clear. It was Greg's voice, slurred slightly by expensive red wine, laughing maliciously. "Richard, don't worry about Julian. The kid is naive. The trust loophole is completely airtight. We systematically strip his equity, reallocate it directly to Preston, and if the kid complains or tries to fight it, we threaten to bury him in endless legal fees. I've structured the documents so he doesn't have a single legal leg to stand on. He's just a code monkey who doesn't understand corporate law. Once Victor signs the term sheet, we push Julian out completely and keep the IP." I stopped the recording. Greg's face turned the color of wet, gray ash. The aggressive, chest-puffing posture completely vanished, replaced by the rigid terror of a man who just realized his entire career was over. In the state we lived in, actively conspiring to defraud a shareholder, even a minority one, was a massive, career-ending ethical violation. It was highly illegal. If I took that crystal-clear recording to the State Bar Association, Greg would not just face heavy fines. He would lose his license to practice law permanently. He would be disbarred and utterly disgraced. "You were saying something about a lawsuit, Greg?" I asked, raising my eyebrows in mock curiosity. Greg slowly lowered his pointing hand. He did not look at my father. He did not look at my weeping mother. He simply turned around, gripped his expensive leather briefcase tightly with white knuckles, and walked out of the room without saying a single word. My father watched his bulldog, his last line of defense, run away with his tail between his legs. The absolute last shred of his fake corporate empire crumbled into dust right in front of his eyes. "You chose the shiny, empty Porsche over the man who actually built the roads you drive on," I said, looking at my defeated father one last time. "You wanted a media-friendly CTO instead of a loyal son. Now you have absolutely nothing." I turned my back on them and walked out of the boardroom. The air outside in the hallway felt instantly lighter, cleaner. As I walked through the bullpen, Silas was waiting near the elevator bank, holding a small cardboard box filled with his personal desk belongings. "You actually quit?" I asked him as the elevator doors chimed and opened. Silas grinned, pushing his glasses up his nose. I updated my resume like you asked last night. But honestly, I would much rather work for whoever actually owns that patent you just dropped on the table. Good, I said, pressing the button for the lobby. Because we have a lot of work to do, and I need a lead developer. 6 months later, the corporate landscape of our city looked incredibly different. Silas and I didn't just sit on the patent and wait for licensing deals. We used the core algorithm to launch our own independent logistics platform from scratch. Without the massive, suffocating overhead of my father's useless executive salaries, the exorbitantly expensive leased office spaces, the ridiculous corporate retreats, and Preston's luxury car payments, our new company was incredibly lean and highly profitable almost immediately. We secured a meeting with Penelope, a brilliant independent venture capitalist who specifically looked for tech companies founded by actual, hard-working engineers, not fast-talking salesmen with empty promises. When I showed her the clean, unencumbered architecture of our system and proved my absolute legal ownership of the LLC, she did not hesitate for a second. She saw the vision. She wrote us a massive seed check that exact same day. We were now working out of a small, bright, sunlit loft on the vibrant other side of the city. There were no imposing mahogany tables. There were no toxic HOA-style meetings, no fake corporate synergy presentations, and absolutely no nepotism. There was just pure, unadulterated respect, late nights of passionate coding, and the deep satisfaction of building something real. Meanwhile, the news regarding my family's old company was incredibly grim, but entirely expected. Without my proprietary algorithm, their logistics platform was completely obsolete and essentially useless. Their existing clients experienced massive server crashes, data leaks, and routing failures. Realizing the platform was dead, the clients left in droves, breaching their contracts to find reliable software. Because my father had arrogant and foolishly personally guaranteed several high-interest business loans expecting Victor's $50 million cash injection to save them, the ensuing bankruptcy was swift, brutal, and highly public. I read the public legal filings online while drinking my morning coffee in my new loft. The company assets were completely liquidated by aggressive creditors. The massive, sprawling suburban real estate my parents owned, the house where they hosted the lavish parties to celebrate Preston, was put up for a humiliating short sale. And Preston's beautiful cherry-red Ferrari? It was aggressively repossessed in the middle of the night by a highly motivated debt collector. The Porsche followed shortly after. Last I heard through the industry grapevine, Preston was living in a small, cramped apartment, working a grueling entry-level cold-calling sales job, and aggressively complaining to anyone who would listen at the local bar about how his vindictive older brother ruined his glorious life. I had completely blocked their phone numbers, their emails, and their social media accounts. I established an absolute, ironclad, impenetrable boundary. No contact, no explanations, no apologies. I was entirely free. But one cold, rainy Tuesday afternoon, as I was leaving my new office building to grab lunch, I found Aunt Beatrice standing on the wet sidewalk under a cheap umbrella, clearly waiting for me. She looked significantly older, incredibly tired, and completely stripped of her usual arrogant, gossip-mongering energy. "Julian," she said, her voice shaking slightly against the chill of the wind. I stopped, pulling the collar of my jacket tighter against the rain. "Beatrice, if you are here as a desperate emissary for Richard and Margaret, you are wasting your breath and my time. I have nothing to say to them." "I'm not," she said quickly, stepping closer and clutching her purse tightly to her chest. I actually came here today to ask you for a personal favor. A small loan just to tide me over. My alimony payments stopped coming in, and since your parents lost absolutely everything in the bankruptcy, they can't help me pay my rent." I almost laughed out loud at the absolute, staggering audacity of the request. The woman who had cornered me at a family barbecue, who had coldly told me to keep my head down, accept my abuse, and stay in my place, was now standing in the rain begging for my money. "Absolutely not, Beatrice," I said clearly and firmly. She looked down at the wet pavement, her shoulders sagging in defeat. "I know you hate us. I know you despise the family. I know what we did was terrible. But Julian, You really need to understand why your mother did what she did all those years. I started walking away, entirely uninterested in her excuses, but her next words stopped me dead in my tracks. They knew Preston was completely useless, Beatrice blurted out, her voice loud over the sound of the traffic. I turned around slowly, the cold rain hitting my face. What did you just say? Beatrice swallowed hard, stepping closer, her eyes wide. Your parents. They aren't stupid business people, Julian. They knew Preston was incompetent. They knew he was lazy, entitled, and completely incapable of running a company. But they babied him because they knew he would never survive in the real world on his own. They bought him the expensive cars, they gave him the fancy titles, and they threw money at him specifically to keep him dependent on them, to keep him at home under their control. She looked at me, a strange, complicated mixture of deep shame and genuine awe in her eyes. But you were brilliant. You were completely independent. From the time you were a teenager, you didn't need them to survive. You didn't ask for their money. You just put your head down and worked harder than anyone else. Your mother was absolutely terrified of losing you. She thought if you ever realized how truly talented and valuable you were, you would leave them behind instantly and build your own incredible life. So they conspired. They constantly criticized you to break your spirit. They severely underpaid you to keep you financially trapped. They gave all the credit to Preston specifically to break your confidence, to brainwash you into thinking you couldn't survive without the family company. The massive revelation hit me like a physical bolt of lightning, illuminating 10 years of absolute, confusing darkness. They didn't hate me because I was inadequate or unlovable. They systematically abused me because they were terrified of my massive potential. My entire adult life, I had been desperately fighting to prove my worth to the exact people who were actively trying to hide my worth from me to keep me enslaved to their business. Thank you for finally telling me that, Beatrice, I said quietly, the last remaining chains of guilt falling away from my soul. So, about that small loan? She asked, a pathetic, desperate glimmer of hope returning to her eyes. Go to a bank, I said. I turned my back on her and walked down the street, my steps lighter than they had ever been. For the first time in my 32 years of life, the heavy, suffocating weight of my family's toxic expectations was completely gone. The decades-long guilt trip was officially canceled permanently. I walked back into my warm apartment, dried off, and looked out the large window at the beautiful city skyline. I had lost a toxic family, but I had finally found myself. I was a builder. I was an architect of my own destiny, and absolutely nobody was ever going to steal my blueprints or my life ever again. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to cut off toxic relatives to save your own future? Or discovered that the people who were supposed to love you were actually holding you back? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.